Camilla Parker Bowles has had a very rough few weeks, and from everything sources are saying, it's only going to get worse from here. There's a story developing inside Buckingham Palace right now that honestly feels like it's been building for 30 years. And it involves two of the most unlikely people joining forces, Princess Anne and Prince William. And the target? The woman sitting right next to King Charles at every official engagement, the woman who spent decades as the other woman, and eventually became Queen Consort. According to sources close to the palace, that position is not as secure as Camilla would like the world to believe. Let's start with what actually kicked this off, because there was a specific moment that made people inside the palace sit up and pay close attention. About 3 weeks before this story started circulating, a senior palace aide made a phone call that sources describe as highly unusual. Not to the press, not to a government minister, not to any of the standard people you call when you're managing a royal communications situation. Before we continue, subscribe to Crown Confidential for the latest royal stories you won't hear anywhere else. But to a lawyer on behalf of Princess Anne about Camilla. The call lasted less than 10 minutes. Short, precise, and according to sources, the kind of conversation someone has when they've already made the decision and just need to confirm the path is clear. That call, sources say, was the first move in something far bigger. Now, Anne has been a member of this family for over 70 years. She watched everything unfold in real time, the affairs, the separation, the panorama interview, the divorce, and Diana's death. She managed her feelings about all of it, both professionally and privately, the way she manages everything. So the natural question is, why now? Why 2026? Why, after 3 decades of keeping this locked down, is Anne allegedly making moves? Sources say the answer has 2 parts, and you need both of them to understand what's actually going on here. The first part is William. William's position in this institution has fundamentally changed over the past 18 months. He's not just waiting in the wings anymore. He is making real financial decisions with real consequences. And the Duchy of Cornwall is where you can see it most clearly. With £1.2 billion in land, property, and investments, all of it is under William's direct control. No consultation required, no approval needed from Charles or anyone else. The clearest public signal of how William planned to use that control came when he removed Annabel Elliot from the duchy payroll. That's Camilla's younger sister, an interior designer who worked across duchy properties under Charles for nearly 20 years, earning anywhere between £19,000 and £82,000 annually, depending on the project. The moment William took over the duchy after Queen Elizabeth's death, Annabel's name stopped appearing in the financial records. No public dispute, no statement, just gone. And she wasn't replaced with a neutral hire. William brought in his own people, friends from his personal circle, godparents of his children, individuals loyal specifically and exclusively to him. Royal commentators picked up on it immediately and noted it was causing significant ripples inside the palace. That decision sent a message that didn't need any translation. And watched that happen. According to sources, she approved completely. And sources suggest that decision opened a conversation between Anne and William that had been waiting years to take place because both of them, for very different but deeply personal reasons, had reached the same point at roughly the same time, done waiting. The second part of the answer is Diana. August 31, 2027, will mark 30 years since Diana died in that Paris tunnel. 30 years since William, at just 15 years old, had to walk behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London in front of the entire world. He's now 43, a husband, a father of 3, and in nearly 30 years of public life, he has never once made a direct statement connecting his feelings about Camilla to his feelings about what his mother went through. He never had to. His actions have been making that statement consistently for years. Sources say Anne reached a point sometime in the past several months where she decided she was finished. Finished allowing institutional loyalty to override private conviction. Finished watching Camilla occupy spaces, both literal and symbolic, that sources suggest and believes belong to Diana's legacy rather than to the woman who spent years contributing to Diana's suffering. Anne, who watched Diana up close during those years and carries her own version of that grief, allegedly decided it was time to act on it. And when she acted, she had access to something that is now making certain people inside Buckingham Palace genuinely uneasy. There is a room at Windsor Castle called the Royal Archives. No tourists, no documentary crews, no public access. What it contains is the unfiltered, unedited, privately recorded history of the British royal family, letters, diaries, internal correspondence, and the written record of what was actually happening inside the institution during the most turbulent decades of the 20th century, including the years when Charles and Diana's marriage was visibly and catastrophically falling apart. Princess Anne has access to those materials at a level very few people outside the immediate family possess, and sources suggest she has been reviewing them. The question worth considering is this: what exactly is in those archives from the 1980s and 1990s that certain people allegedly do not want surfacing right now? Because the broad strokes are already public knowledge. The 1992 separation, the Camillagate tapes in 1993, Charles' television confession in 1994, Diana's Panorama interview in 1995, the divorce in 1996, and Diana's death in 1997 have all been documented, analyzed, and debated across 3 decades of books and documentaries. What sources suggest is in those archives goes beyond the broad strokes. It's the specificity, the private, contemporaneous written record of who knew what, when they knew it, who facilitated what, and how. The internal institutional dimension of this situation is something the public record only partially captures. How Diana's concerns were received and handled. How the institution managed a situation in which one of its own members was suffering in a very well documented and very public way. According to sources familiar with Anne's alleged archival review, the materials tell a story of institutional failure that goes considerably further than anything publicly available has ever revealed. And sources say Anne believes that story deserves to become part of the complete historical record, not shaped or softened by the preferences of the people who would rather it remained hidden. Camilla is said to be one of those people. A complete and accurate historical record of the Wales marriage is not a comfortable document for the current Queen consort, and it never was. The difference now is that the person allegedly asking questions about whether that record should remain contained is someone with the access, the authority, and, frankly, the personal motivation to do something about it. Sources suggest Anne's position is straightforward. The historical record of that period should be complete and unredacted, and the woman now sitting beside the king at every state occasion has no right to shape how the most painful chapter of Diana's life is remembered. That's allegedly where Anne keeps landing. And that conclusion, sources say, has implications for Camilla that go well beyond anything happening with property or payroll. Now, let's talk about what William is doing simultaneously, because this is where the story becomes even more layered. The Duchy of Cornwall generated approximately £30 million in a single year in 2025. Tenant farms, holiday cottages, the Isles of Scilly, Dartmoor land rights, and commercial investments accumulated across nearly 700 years of royal estate management. Every pound of it is controlled solely by William. And sources suggest he has been using that control with a level of precision that people inside Camilla's circle are only now fully appreciating. The Annabel Elliot removal was the opening move, and it was already significant enough on its own. But sources say what followed went considerably further. Access to crown events, proximity to official royal occasions, and invitations that had previously been extended to members of Camilla's wider circle were quietly withdrawn. Appearances where Parker Bowles family members had expected to be present were restructured without explanation. The same slow, deliberate, and entirely deniable narrowing of access that characterized the Elliot situation was allegedly applied more broadly across every connection between Camilla's family and the institution William controls. Nothing that generates a headline on its own. Everything that adds up to something unmistakable when you step back and look at the full picture. And then there's the Diana dimension of what William is doing financially, which sources describe as entirely intentional. William has been quietly redirecting certain Duchy-connected philanthropic resources toward causes Diana originally championed. Mental health, homelessness, HIV awareness, the causes Diana made her own during her lifetime. The ones the establishment initially resisted because they were considered too raw and too political for a senior royal to engage with directly. Diana supported them anyway and paid an institutional price for it. Now her son controls £1.2 billion in assets and around £30 million in annual income, and sources say he is directing a portion of those resources toward exactly the places his mother supported when the institution she belonged to was actively working to contain her. Sources say Anne has privately expressed something that, in anyone less disciplined, you would simply call satisfaction. Because what Anne is allegedly doing with the archives and what William is allegedly doing with the duchy represent what sources describe as a two-front operation. History and money. The past and the future. Both allegedly being reshaped at the same time by the two people in this family with the strongest personal reasons to reshape them. And Camilla is caught directly in the middle. Her ceremonial position is being affected too. And this part of the story is worth paying especially close attention to because it's subtle in a way that makes it easy to miss unless you're watching for it. When Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May, 2023, wearing the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, Queen Elizabeth's personal favourite, the one that appeared on British banknotes for decades, it was a statement. A carefully chosen signal that Camilla had arrived, that her position was fully legitimate and that the rehabilitation was complete. For her supporters, it was a triumphant moment. For others inside the palace, sources suggest it marked the beginning of a countdown. Because that tiara will one day sit on Catherine's head as Queen Consort. And when that happens, the symbolic transfer will be so complete and so unmistakable that everything Camilla's coronation moment represented will effectively be overwritten. Sources suggest Anne and William both understand that perfectly, and they are not waiting passively for that day to arrive. Because in royal life, symbols are not decoration. They are power. The specific objects, ceremonies, and patronages associated with the crown communicate something to the institution and to the public about who matters, who belongs, and whose legacy endures. Camilla has spent 2 decades accumulating those symbols, royal patronages, charitable associations, and ceremonial roles that give her position substance and legitimacy beyond simply being Charles's wife. Sources suggest that accumulation is allegedly being disrupted. When Queen Elizabeth died, she held hundreds of royal patronages, and the redistribution of those patronages among working royals has been ongoing since 2022. Sources suggest Anne has allegedly been involved in certain patronage decisions in ways that have quietly influenced that redistribution. Specific high-profile patronages that were reportedly being positioned for Camilla were allegedly redirected, not through any announced decision that could be pointed to publicly, but through a quiet reallocation that sources describe as reflecting priorities rather than logistics. In 2025, Charles granted William and Catherine the authority to issue royal warrants, the ability to publicly endorse brands and institutions on behalf of the crown, a privilege monarchs have historically guarded very carefully. Extending it to William and Catherine was a public signal about where the crown's symbolic weight was being deliberately repositioned, toward the next generation, toward William and Catherine, and away from the current reign and everything associated with it, including Camilla. Sources also suggest that decisions currently being made about how the reign of Charles III is being documented, official photographs, historical displays, and crown documentary projects, reflecting William and Anne's priorities about how this period should be remembered. Who gets centered, who becomes peripheral, whose presence in the visual record is prominent, and whose is quietly minimized. Royal history is shaped by what gets preserved and how. The visual record of a reign becomes the historical record, and the historical record becomes legacy. Camilla's legacy, sources suggest, is allegedly being shaped right now by people with very specific views about what it should contain. And sources describe her private reaction to the cumulative weight of all these moves as the response of someone watching their own carefully constructed image being methodically and permanently dismantled. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 quiet ones. Each individually deniable and collectively devastating. Then there is her personal situation, which tells its own story. Camilla sold Ray Mill House. No press release, no lifestyle magazine feature, no carefully managed announcement, just a property that appeared on the market and quietly disappeared from her portfolio. The Wiltshire retreat she had owned since before she married Charles. The place she publicly described as her personal escape. The garden she once called the best therapy in the world. Gone. And sources suggest that sale tells you more about where Camilla's mindset is right now than anything she has said publicly in months. People do not sell their personal sanctuaries casually. They do not part with the one place that belongs entirely to them, the one that predates everything that came after, unless something has fundamentally shifted in how they see their own future. Right now, Camilla moves through multiple royal residences as a matter of course, Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, Sandringham, Balmoral, the full infrastructure of a reigning queen consort with access to the most significant private royal properties in existence. That picture changes completely when Charles dies. Sandringham passes to William. Balmoral passes to William. Buckingham Palace becomes William and Catherine's primary official residence. The properties Camilla currently moves through as a matter of right become properties she can only access at William's invitation. Sources suggest her likely inheritance consists of Clarence House, valued at approximately £72 million, and Highgrove, valued at around £39 million. Significant assets by any normal measure, but completely inadequate as a substitute for the position she currently occupies. She would go from queen consort, with the full weight of the monarchy behind her, to a private citizen with a queen dowager title, living in two houses at the discretion of a man who grew up watching what she did to his mother. Sources suggest Camilla understands that reality very clearly. The family dimension only compounds everything. Annabel Elliot is gone from the duchy payroll. Tom Parker Bowles' access to royal spaces allegedly ended following the Balmoral situation. The Parker Bowles family's broader proximity to Crown events has been quietly narrowing. Camilla spent 20 years building a network of access and association for her children and siblings inside the institution she married into. Sources suggest William is dismantling it piece by piece with a patience and thoroughness that speaks to genuine long-term intent rather than temporary frustration. And then there's the Sarah Ferguson situation, which has become a liability Camilla genuinely cannot manage her way out of. Ferguson's name appears in the Epstein files released by the United States Department of Justice. There is no evidence of criminal wrongdoing on her part, but the association is real and documented. And in the context of Andrew's scandals and the ongoing institutional fallout, sources suggest William has made his position completely clear to Camilla. Distance yourself from Ferguson publicly and permanently, or accept the consequences of the association. Camilla has not fully complied. She views ending a friendship that predates her entire royal life as both personally impossible and fundamentally unfair. William views her continued loyalty to Ferguson as evidence of exactly the kind of judgment failure that justifies his concerns about Camilla's fitness to represent the institution going forward. That standoff remains unresolved, and sources suggest it is steadily costing Camilla influence inside the palace with every passing week. Now, here's where the story gets genuinely complicated because sitting in the middle of all of this is Charles. And Charles's position in this situation is one of the most painful things to examine. Sources say he made a phone call to Anne in February of this year that they describe as one of the most difficult conversations between the two siblings in decades. Not angry, not accusatory, quiet and deeply pained. The call of a man who understands exactly what his sister is doing, exactly why she is doing it, and finds himself completely unable to argue against it with any real conviction. The call reportedly lasted 40 minutes and ended with nothing resolved. That detail alone tells you a great deal about where Charles actually stands. He is 76 years old. He was diagnosed with cancer in February 2024. The specific type has never been publicly disclosed, but treatment continued throughout 2024 and into 2025. He has maintained his public duties across that period with remarkable discipline. But discipline is not the same as strength, and keeping up appearances is not the same as having the capacity to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Sources suggest his energy for managing complex internal family dynamics has diminished significantly over the past 18 months. And protecting Camilla from what William and Anne are allegedly doing requires exactly the kind of sustained, repeated, conflict-absorbing engagement he is least equipped for right now. Protecting Camilla would mean telling William to restore access and privileges to people William deliberately removed. William would not comply, and Charles knows it. It would mean telling Anne to stop whatever she is allegedly doing with the archives. Anne would not comply, and Charles knows that too. It would mean positioning himself publicly against both his heir and his sister simultaneously in defense of the woman that millions of people still associate with his first wife's suffering. The political and personal cost of that position is one Charles simply cannot afford. And sources suggest he is fully aware of that. But here is the dimension of Charles's position that sources describe as the most painful of all. He knows why William and Anne feel the way they feel. Because he was there, and he was the cause of it. He is the man who conducted the affair that Diana described in terms of profound personal devastation. He is the reason that grief exists. How do you argue against your son's grief over his mother when you are the reason that grief exists in the first place? How do you tell your sister that protecting your wife's position matters more than honoring the sister-in-law who suffered directly because of your own choices? Sources suggest Charles cannot make either of those arguments with genuine conviction because he does not fully believe them himself. There is a comment Charles allegedly made to a senior aide during this period that sources describe as quietly revealing. He did not express anger at William. He did not express frustration with Anne. He allegedly expressed understanding. The understanding of a man who knows that the people moving against his wife are doing so for reasons he himself created, and who has no answer for that. So what does all of this actually add up to? Because there's a version of this story that looks like revenge. William and Anne systematically dismantling everything Camilla built as payback for what she did to Diana. And there's another version that looks like something more thoughtful and far more enduring than revenge. Sources suggest the second version is closer to the truth. Simple revenge would look like Camilla being publicly humiliated, stripped of everything in one dramatic moment. That is not what sources describe William and Anne as building. What sources describe is something more patient, more permanent, and ultimately more meaningful. Think about what Diana actually stood for, not the fairy tale image, but the real substance of what she did. She touched AIDS patients when the establishment was still treating the disease as something shameful. She walked through active minefields in Angola to make a political point about weapons killing civilians. She sat with homeless people, looked them in the eye, and treated them as fully human in a way that senior royals simply were not expected to do. She did all of this against the active resistance of an institution that found her emotional directness threatening and her popularity destabilizing. She was right about all of it. The institution was wrong. And William knows this, not through historical analysis, but through lived personal experience. He watched his mother be right while the institution punished her for it. Now he runs part of that institution. Sources suggest William's modernization agenda is not simply good management practice. It is Diana's legacy expressed institutionally. The emotional intelligence she was told was inappropriate. The public accountability she was told was dangerous. The genuine human connection she was told was beneath the dignity of a senior royal. Sources suggest all of it is now being built into the very architecture of the monarchy William is constructing. Anne's contribution runs in parallel, decades of quiet, genuinely impactful work that represents a living argument against performative royalty. The exact argument Diana made and ultimately paid everything to make. And here is what sources suggest Camilla is slowly and painfully coming to understand. She won the battle. She got Charles. She got the title. She got the coronation, the tiara, and the seat beside the king. But the war was never about Charles. It was about Diana, what Diana represented, and whether the institution Diana tried to change would eventually become something worthy of the price she paid. William and Anne are allegedly building that institution now, not for revenge, but for Diana. And Camilla has no counter-strategy for that. You cannot argue against a legacy. You cannot litigate grief. You cannot outmaneuver a son who watched his mother die and spent nearly 3 decades deciding quietly and deliberately what to do about it. Diana never got to see what this monarchy could become. She got a Paris tunnel, 2 boys without a mother, and a family that barely lowered its flag. But sources suggest something is happening inside Buckingham Palace right now that she never lived to see. Her son and her sister-in-law moving together, quietly and permanently, reshaping everything. Camilla built into something Diana would have recognized as hers. Not revenge. Something greater than revenge. Legacy. And that, more than any property dispute, payroll decision, or symbolic tiara, is what sources describe as Camilla's darkest reality in decades.